Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It is now 9 o'clock. We shall begin so that we can start and end in time. I want to thank everybody for having joined in. And as people are joining in, I would ask that we mute our microphones and keep them muted. So for those of you who may not have been in here last week, my name is Karen Nyangara. I am a gender advisor at the Commonwealth of Learning, which is hosting this course, and we shall be learning together throughout the course. As we begin also, I want to find out, Sandy, were you able to join? Let me see. Sandy had a problem joining. Sandy is our technical advisor and the one who has been communicating throughout with most of you, and I hope that she will be able to join us a little bit later. So as we begin, I'd just like to remind everybody that this session is being recorded, and that if you are not comfortable with the session being recorded, you would have to let us know. And you can remain muted if you don't wish to have your voice recorded at any point. If you don't wish to contribute, you are free to remain mute through the session. I would also like to remind you that the session will be available. I hope all of you have been able to access the previous session. So the recording will be available as soon as it is ready. It will be uploaded into the module. Now, I want to thank you very much because I went through Module 1 discussion forum, and there have been quite a lot of people who contributed towards asking where is there gender inequality in their communities, and many of you gave us examples from your communities. That was a very interesting discussion. Thank you so much for your participation. Kindly, if you're here and you have not participated in the discussion forum, you're missing out. I would like to encourage you to not only post your own thoughts and feelings and ideas about something, but also to comment on what others have posted. That will mean that for some of us who are not used to using the discussion forums on Moodle, go back into your introduction to Moodle and look and see how do I participate in a discussion? How do I reply to a discussion? So it will be good to do that because that makes the course interesting for you. If you just go through the modules without interacting with your fellow colleagues, either on discussion forum or on the WhatsApp group, then it becomes a very lonely journey. But if you are participating in discussion forums, seeing what other people have posted, asking them questions, getting your ideas out there, it makes it much, much more interesting. So I really, really encourage you all to do that. So once again, thank you for that participation. I am going to, I did send out a general notice to everybody saying thank you for participating. If you have not yet joined, you need to be joining and so on. I sent out this general message. I am going to make a very strange request. Kindly do not reply to my messages on the module. Now, this is not for Sandy, this is for Karen. Kindly do not reply to my messages on the module, and because it means that I am receiving 700 emails saying thank you very much. And I want to thank you all so much because I know that we know that it is polite to respond to a message. But unless there is a problem, you don't need to respond to my message and I will not be offended. Is no response, because the opposite is that I get 700 or 600 messages back, which overwhelms my email and I have to shut it down. So thank you so much for those of you who responded. Thank you for being polite enough, but I'll request that we don't have to do that. You don't have to reply to me. If there is a technical problem, send a message directly to Sandy. I've also noticed that some of us are on the WhatsApp, you have a problem, you have a technical problem. Or somebody saying my volume is too low. I think your volume may be too low because mine is at maximum. So kindly check your volume on your laptop. So as I was saying, some of us have maybe a technical problem and we put it on the WhatsApp group or on the general messages. If you have a specific issue, kindly message Sandy directly so that she can help you quickly and so that it can be something that is sorted out. Otherwise, I want to welcome you today. I want to start sharing my screen so that we can begin. This is our second webinar, and it is on human rights. So we are still in the course on capacity building and capacity building in gender equality and women's empowerment. As I've said, today we are looking at human rights. But before we go into that, why don't we recapitulate just a little bit of what we did the last time? Now, we were looking at generally an introduction to the course. And we were talking about several things, but I just want to recap on two very important things. One of these is on the gender terminology and how that gender terminology then is interpreted in our lives and in our day-to-day living. And we said that gender terminology has four aspects. One of these is the sex that is assigned at birth, whether you are male, whether you are female, whether you are intersex. It is assigned because of your biological features that the doctors are able to identify at birth. But then after that, then we develop a gender identity, and that is how we see ourselves. I was assigned a sex at birth. Is that the way I see myself as a girl or as a woman? Is that the way I see myself as a man or as a boy? Then we have gender expression, and that is how we want to display our gender. Because I am a woman, how that I behave, how is it that I act, how is it that I think? These are things that then help me to identify myself as feminine or as masculine or as androgynous. And we say that as androgynous, you are expressing yourself as neither feminine or masculine. You're somewhere in the middle of those two. Now, when we talk about gender attribution, then we say how your gender is perceived by others. And remember, we also said that sex that is assigned at birth, the sex that you're given at birth, is, I would say, like, it is an expression, like this is a boy, this is a girl. But then society has certain expectations of what boys should be like and what girls should be like. And these are the things that form our gender identities. So gender is always a societal expression based on what we think girls should behave like and boys should behave like. And so this leads then to two important things. When we are socialized, because gender is social, when we are socialized by the people who are bringing us up, that is our parents or our guardians or our grandparents, whoever is bringing you up, they then expose you to the wider world, which is your teachers, which is religious leaders, which is politics. And all of this shape the way in which we are socialized into gender. Your friends have an impact on how you behave. Your siblings, your society has a impact on the way you behave. And some of this behavior can lead to gender stereotypes. And gender stereotypes can then lead into gender discrimination. We're going to look at that just a little bit before we go into human rights, because it helps us to understand a little bit about human rights violations. Now, when we are talking about gender, we need to try and understand and have an understanding that is a consensus or a common understanding of what we mean by this socialization and this gender. Now, one of the ways in which we understand gender is by looking at what researchers and scientists have said about it. Now, there is one of the most famous researchers into gender and sex, and she is called Sandra Bem. Sandra developed what we call a sex role inventory. If you Google up Sandra Bem's sex role inventory, it is actually it is a test that you can actually do online and find out where you fall, whether you're masculine, whether you're feminine, whether you're androgynous. Now, to help us to understand gender stereotyping, I want us to look at this chart or this diagram. Now, on the left-hand side of that diagram, there is what we call the masculine traits. these masculine traits are stereotypical in that it is assumed that all men behave like this. So let us look at this, this masculine part. Men are supposed to be self-reliant, supposed to be independent, they are supposed to be athletic, assertive, forceful, and so on and so forth. On the opposite side, we have feminine traits. And women are supposed to be yielding, cheerful, shy, affectionate, flatterable. They're supposed to be understanding. They're supposed to love children. Now, these traits are what society expects of people who are masculine. That is, if you have been labeled male as at birth, and then the traits that are supposed to be feminine, if you have been labeled female at birth. Then we have the androgynous, and androgynous people are high on both of these traits. Kindly mute yourself. Kindly mute yourself as you join. Thank you very much. So once we talk about these traits, then that understanding means that we are saying that these are gender stereotypical traits. Now, I want us to think, when we try to think about these traits, I want us in our imagination, look at the left-hand side, which says masculine. What if we were to say that these are feminine traits? Think about that. Are there women that you know? Are there females that you know, are there females that you know that are self-reliant, that are independent, that are athletic? Or is, for example, if we think about the Olympic Games or races in a country, are there no women in those races? Are there no women participating in games so that we can say that women are not athletic? Are there any women that are leaders? Are there women that take risks, ambitious? This means that when we say that these traits are masculine, they are not necessarily masculine, they are stereotypes. Let us look at the opposite end of it, where we talk about the feminine traits. Are there no men that are cheerful? Are there men that are shy? Are there men that love children? Are there men that are understanding? And for sure, we will say that yes, for each of these traits, you will find that there are women who have masculine traits and there are men who have feminine traits. Having those traits, having feminine traits when you are a man does not make you less of a man. It makes you more of a human being. Having masculine traits, if you are a woman, does not make you less of a woman. It makes you a human being. So in other words, what I am trying to say is that the masculine, the sex role inventory and the socialization on gender is something that society expects of us, but it's not necessarily that everybody is that way. It does not mean that if, as a woman, I am ambitious, then that makes me masculine. It simply makes me an ambitious woman. And so the reason why these are important is if we go back to the previous slide. Why is it important for us to understand? When we look at gender stereotypes, excuse me, I need a sip of liquid. When we look at gender stereotypes, gender stereotyping usually can end up in gender discrimination. And these are some of the things that some of you shared in your discussions. For example, somebody says, I was in a meeting. This was a very good one. I was in a meeting and I gave my ideas, but because the other three were men, my idea was not taken up. One of the men's ideas was taken up, but the idea that he gave was mine. So this man has been allowed to take up or to steal the idea that you have given in a meeting, and he is being praised because he gave it. But the idea was originally belonging to a woman. So all are stereotyped, and stereotyping, when it is taken to the extreme, it leads to gender discrimination. I'll give you some more examples of this. In other words, how sex assigned at birth gender identity, gender expression, and gender attribution lead to gender discrimination. Let us take the way in which some countries value one sex over the others. In many communities, we know that when a boy is born, especially if a boy is the firstborn, families are extremely happy. But then, even if it is a girl, it is okay. They are fine with it. But there are countries in which the value of one sex over the other can lead to sex-selective abortion. In that, I go to the doctor and find out that I am carrying a girl and I choose to have an abortion because of that. There are countries, for example, where infanticide, the killing of babies or the murder of babies, is extremely high when those babies are not of the correct gender. And I'm putting correct in quotation terms. In countries like India, in countries like China, when they still had the one-child policy, if that child was not of the gender that was required, usually these children would be killed or abandoned. There is in China, there are orphanages, for example, where you have girls that have been abandoned, children with disabilities that have been abandoned. And these children, some of them have no papers, have no registration. Some families had, when they had a second child, these are a few years before the one-child policy was repealed. When they had a second child, that child was not given a birth certificate. That child could not go to school. That child could not be recognized in any way by the state. And so you have this child who does not exist except in the physical body. And that is where we say that sex assigned at birth, if we talk about gender discrimination, can lead to sex-selective abortion, can lead to infanticide, can lead to children who are not recognized anywhere in their own country. When we say that, for example, gender identity, that is personal. It is something that if I do not accept, I was assigned female at birth, and I do not accept that I am female, maybe I feel male, it can lead to something we call body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphia is a condition where somebody does not accept the feminine, like because I'm a woman, I don't accept those feminine aspects of myself. I think of them as ugly, as horrible, as terrible. I want to take on male characteristics. And this body dysmorphia can lead to a lot of psychological problems. It can lead to physical harm. When gender identity becomes a little bit, it becomes like something that you need to fit into your workplace. This happens especially to females when they take leadership positions. They want to take on masculine traits of dominance and assertiveness in order to fit into the workplace. So their gender identity is feminine, but then they express themselves in a different way because they want to fit in. So when we are talking about what people should feel, what people should be like, remember that it can lead to gender discrimination because society expects us to behave in a certain way. So when we talk about building consensus on gender, let us remember that when we take feminine traits, attribute them only to women, take masculine traits and attribute them only to men, then we have making the mistake of saying that this is what society says you should be like, and therefore we expect you to be like that. And remember that this is not something that changes overnight. I know many of us, when we look at this sex role inventory, we are thinking, yeah, these are the correct traits. But then even in yourself, you know that there are aspects of you that are, you may be feminine, but there are aspects of you that are considered masculine. And sometimes we try to push down these aspects and say, no, because I am a female, I'm not going to speak up in a meeting because that is not the way females behave. But what happens then? At the end of it, maybe there is a promotion coming and they say, we will not give it to Jane. Jane never says anything in meetings. Jane never has any ideas to contribute. But what you are doing was trying to put yourself in the small box that is called femininity. And so you behave in that way. Or let's take a man. You're not supposed to show feelings of love and affection. And so you treat your children in a way that makes them afraid of you. But that hurts you as a father, because that means that when children have something to say, they only share it with their mother. And as a father, you're thinking, why don't my children ever tell me anything? In other words, when we want to look at gender and gender socialization, let us remember that these traits are stereotypes, and these are stereotypes that we need to think about how to overcome them. Because when they are taken to the extreme, they lead to gender discrimination. So to move on, what are human rights? And human rights are something that we find within our society, that human rights are those rights that are extended to everybody. What do we mean by that? Human rights are, first of all, let's just look at the diagram that we have. Human rights apply, first of all, to all human beings. What does it mean? First of all, they are universal. What this means is that everyone is born with and they possess the same rights. Regardless of where you live, regardless of your gender, your race, your identity, your religious background, your cultural background, human rights belong to everybody who is born a human being. That is very important to remember. Secondly, they are inalienable. Inalienable means that these rights can never be taken away. You are born with a certain human right because you are a human being. It cannot be taken away. That is what we mean by inalienable. Thirdly, they are indivisible and interdependent. That means that all of these rights are equal in importance. You cannot divide a human right in two and say that part of this human right is okay and part of this human right is not okay. But they are also interdependent. They are of equal importance. There is no human right which is higher than the other. So for indivisible, we say that you cannot have part of a human right as acceptable and another part not acceptable. But when they are interdependent, we mean that they are of equal importance, each of these human rights. And then we say that they are interrelated. All of the human rights, when we say they're universal, indivisible, inalienable, interdependent, this is an interrelated relationship between the human rights. So when we are talking about human rights, we are saying that they are like a circle or like a whole, like if we take an orange, for example, an orange has got different pieces to it. But one piece of an orange is not a full orange. It is only when it is full and complete that we can say that this is an orange. And that is the way it is with human rights. Now, I want to pause for just one moment and do a short exercise. And in this short exercise, you are not allowed to Google. This is only from your knowledge. In the chat, can you share one human right that you know? Just type it in the chat. I can see right to life, right to education, right to life, right to access health services, the right to speak, the right to education, health, life, education, right to access sexual reproductive health, rights to employment, rights to life, right to shelter. Wonderful. This is great. We are aware of the human rights. Everybody has a right. The first right that we have, of course, is the right to life. And that right to life then begins the basis of all other rights. It helps us to establish the basis of all other rights, because if you are not alive, then you are not a human being that is then can enjoy those rights. Now, in your module, you will be able to see that there are 15 human rights. Look at them and see them in terms of what we have just explained, that they are interrelated. They are inalienable. None of those rights supersedes the others. all of us have the same right to life, to liberty, to security of person, to freedom from slavery, to be having a nationality, to have favorable working conditions, and all the other rights, each of them equal in importance. Now, one thing then that we can ask ourselves is that why then are there human rights violations? That fact that there are human rights violations does not mean that these human rights can be taken away. It means that they can be abused or they can be violated. What that means is that human right stands as an independent human right, but that there is somebody with the power to take away or to curtail this human right. And some of these curtailing of human rights comes about in different ways, which you're going to see just a little bit later. So let us remember before we move from here, in terms of what you have shared in the chat, is that there are no separate human rights. And that means that so long as you are a human being, you enjoy all rights. In module 2, you're going to be learning about human rights, women's rights, as human rights. There are no separate rights for women. All rights belong to everybody. And so therefore, women's rights are human rights. You will understand a little bit more of that as you go through the module. So when you are going through the module, one of the parts that you're going to see is international instruments for advancing gender equality. And I just want to share this for a minute to help you to understand what you will be seeing in the module. So you will see, first of all, a list of international instruments. I've only used 3 in my example so that we can understand what this means. The first one is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. It is, in short form, it is called CEDAW. A convention is a binding formal agreement that is signed by governments. These documents, because they are international documents, are set out by the UN General Assembly. So if a member state of the UN General Assembly attends a meeting of the assembly, they may end up signing a document. So your president will sign on your behalf, or whoever is head of that delegation will sign on behalf of the citizens of a country. And that means that it is a binding agreement that is signed by a government. CEDAW, the first one, is the most comprehensive international instrument to protect the rights of women. It outlines the kind of actions that governments must do to end discrimination against girls and women. And we're going to see some of those specific areas that CEDAW has been able to achieve. Some examples. Now, the second international instrument is called a strategy. Strategies show details of how something will be achieved. When you have a meeting in an organization, or you have maybe a staff meeting, usually there are resolutions that are saying, these are the action points. Before the next meeting, we shall have done A, B, C, D. So the Nairobi Forward-Looking Strategies to the year 2000 were strategies showing details of how certain aspects of gender equality will be achieved. You will see a little bit more of that in the module. And the third one is called the Beijing Platform, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Declarations also arise out of assembly resolutions and agreements. What have we agreed on? And we declare it to the world that this is what we want. Unlike conventions, declarations are not legally binding. A convention, if a government signs a convention, they have to put in place the finances, the resources, the people to do it. But a declaration, they may make a declaration as part of the people who attend the General Assembly, but it is not legally binding. Read a little bit more of this in your module. Now, just to show you, because sometimes we say, some of these things that are signed by these governments, do they make any difference? Is there anything that happens? I want to just show you some examples of the impact of a convention on gender equality. Now, remember from the previous slide that CEDAW was signed in 1979. Out of that, what are some of the things that changed in countries that and that bound themselves to this convention and made a difference. Pakistan, for example, introduced co-education in primary schools in 1996 to 1997 after they ratified the CEDAW. Now, why is this important? When you have a country where normally there is restrictions, because Pakistan is one of those, where there is restrictions due to religious background on girls in public spaces, and you have single-sex schools, it means that if boys are attending those schools, girls who have reached puberty will not usually be allowed to attend those schools. So when you say we are having co-educational schools and girls are free to attend, there is a very sharp increase in girls' enrollment. So that is a direct impact of CEDAW. Let us take another example. In Turkey, CEDAW removed barriers to women's political participation. What was the problem? In Turkey, there was a ban on women wearing headscarves in parliament. Now, remember again, this is a religious thing, and women wear headscarves or women cover their heads. Now, if you say in parliament, you cannot wear a headscarf, it means no women can attend parliament because they are again not allowed into that public space without a headscarf. After CEDAW, there was activism and advocacy. And by citing CEDAW, women were able to say that that ban has to be removed, which means that it opens up space for women to enter into parliament. The result is that more women were elected into parliament. Let us have just a third one. You can read the rest when we share the recording. In 2009, all 32 Mexican states adopted a general law on women's access to a life free from violence. Mexico at the time had some of the highest incidences of gender-based violence worldwide. And so they made a general law to protect women from a life free from violence. All of these are because of CEDAW. So because a government binds itself to a convention, they then put in place measures that are legal to that government. Let us move on. In terms of some of the issues of our times, again, this you will find in the module. I'm just trying to clarify a few of the things. Now, what are the pressing issues of our times? Why is there a lot of human rights violation? Remember, we said that these human rights, they stand. The countries that have ratified these conventions, it is in their constitutions, it is in their laws, it is in everything that they hold to uphold the rule of law, but still there are human rights violations. Why does this happen? Number one is institutionalized inequality and gender-based discrimination. Now, what do we mean by institutionalized? It means that in some countries, despite the fact that every human being has a right to life, to liberty, to freedoms of speech and association, there are laws in some countries that say that are targeted towards one gender. Now, let us take the example that is known worldwide, Afghanistan. The picture that you see, the very first picture on the left, is that women are not expected in public spaces. And women's voices have been silenced very much in Afghanistan. Women are banned from schools, from universities, from public spaces. You cannot even, for example, women's hair salons or women beauty salons were banned. It means that as a woman, I cannot go to a space where only women are because it is in a public space. Women are restricted from jobs. They cannot be in jobs that are international. For example, they cannot work for the United Nations. They cannot work for NGOs, for non-governmental organizations. Some of these restrictions in Afghanistan have meant that women have then completely disappeared from public life because of institutionalized inequality, which leads to gender-based discrimination. This is a human rights violation. It does not mean that the human right does not exist. Now, second, if we go to the bottom right, laws that contain gender discriminatory provisions. Now, look at this picture on child marriage. It says that almost 750 million women who are alive today were married before their 18th birthday. Why is this important? In many countries, the law says that an adult is 18 years and above. That is when in many countries you are able to get a national identification, a passport, a driver's license. You are able to enter into a contract. It means that you are an adult. Marriage is a contract. That is why there is always a marriage certificate that is issued by not just the religious body that people are married to, but is also issued by a courthouse or by the state. And so therefore, when we say that child marriage, we're talking about anybody below 18 years. If the law allows for parental consent for children under the age of 18 to get married, then we're talking about laws that contain gender discriminatory provisions. So if you look at the contradiction, it means that there are certain laws that allow child marriage. Some of these are cultural, some are religious. But in some states, because of that difference between what is the age of consent and what is the age of marriage, it also provides a loophole for child marriage. In 24 countries in the world, women cannot give nationality to their children. It means that there must be a man who says that this child is a national of this country, and therefore children born to single mothers are denied a nationality. So they cannot confer their own nationality on their children. Or if I am of a different nationality, I moved to a country and I'm not of that nationality, I got married, I got divorced, it means that I cannot give my children my nationality in that country. There are these laws that are discriminatory against women. And the third very pressing issue of our times is sexual violence during armed conflict. In your spare time, I'd like you to Google up something interesting. How many countries in the world right now are not having any form of conflict? And you will find that most of the countries, majority of the countries in this world have some form of conflict or the other, whether it is internal, whether it is with a neighbor, whether it is with more than one neighbor. And sexual violence during armed conflict is one of the biggest crimes or violations of human rights against women. And sexual violence is used as a weapon of war. They say that when men go out to fight the war, women are also left behind fighting that same, but on a sexual front. So we talk about sexual slavery, forced prostitution, forced abortions where women have had even their babies taken out from their stomachs. All of this sexual violence during armed conflict escalates. And even when the war ends or the conflict ends, there are so many women who have been displaced because of sexual violence that the war for them continues even if peace has returned to their country. Many are taken away from their homes into sexual violence. We have countries where where soldiers have camps that take away girls. If you think about some of the stories that you've had, maybe from a country like Nigeria, where schools are raided and girls are taken away into sexual slavery to become wives for soldiers. And these are young girls that are in very early stages of 8 to 9, 10 years, are taken away as sexual slaves. When the war ends, or when they are rescued, some of them saying, I want to go back to my husband. This is a child who has then had the mentality change because of violations, that she is no longer able to understand that she is now free from that sexual slavery. So again, I ask you, Google it up in your spare time. How many countries are at peace without any internal conflict at the present time? Now, we have talked about human rights violations, and I would like to also hear your voices. I want to stop the share and I want to ask, why do human rights violations occur in your community or in the area in which you are? If it is a sensitive area, you don't have to tell us from which country you're coming from. But I'd like to welcome us to raise. Remember, we raise our hands and then we share so that there is some order or some control in sharing. Let us think for a short moment. Why do human rights violations occur in your Anyone would like to react? Yes, I can see one hand, two hands. Let me get to those hands just a second. Nanga Cecilia, let's start with you.
Okay, good evening.
Yes, please.
The reason why a woman is not supposed to speak in front of men. So just to keep quiet when I'm suffering. That's what.
Sorry, you said that the human rights occur because women are not supposed to speak in front of men.
In some communities,
yes,
women speak, so they can't express themselves in case there is something happening among themselves.
Okay, thank you so much. So that is the violation of the right to freedom of speech. Thank you very much. Maria, you can unmute. Maria, we can't hear you.
Okay, I just want to give hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm from Namibia. I just want to give an example why women rights are violated like in our country. But for me, I'm so proud of our country because now the violation of rights is reducing. It's not like previous. But we still have, especially when it's come to culture. Culture also play a role when it's come to violation of the rights of the women's rights in our country. In some cultures, we are still struggling the people, they are still struggling because of the culture. They say, it's the culture. The child need to get married before the age of 20 or 21. Because of the culture, we cannot do anything, but we are trying our best. And I can see there's a change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bokosi?
Thank you so much. In Malawi, I think it's still happening because of the issue of power over. So there is this one component of our society that still feels is much more powerful and therefore takes control of the social institutions, the economic institution at home, and things of that sort.
Okay, thank you very much, Anani. That's a great answer. Thomas?
Yeah, thank you so much. Coming from Malawi, weak law enforcement is also one of the key factors because those perpetrators of violence are never brought to book. So it becomes like a way of living. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Virginia Chimodzi.
Hello.
Yes,
this is Virginia Chimodzi from Malawi. So women's violence is being promoted because women themselves fail to express or to report the violation cases to the authorities. So most women in Malawi suffer in silence because they are afraid maybe they are not economically empowered. So if the perpetrator is their husband, so they might think that if my husband is arrested and being imprisoned, who will provide for the children, who being the man was the breadwinner. So they fail to report. Instead, they continue suffering the virus in silence.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Soila, what kind of, why do human rights violations occur in your country or community? Soila?
This is Soila from Kenya. And I think mostly from where I come from, it's because of the cultural practices, retrogressive cultural practices, especially against women, where we have the female genital mutilation as very rampant. Secondly, I think there's a big clash between cultural laws and the laws of the nation, where at times we can have a case of maybe a child whose human rights have been violated. But then again, when it goes to court, at some point they say there's no enough evidence, or the people have decided to settle it out of court. And sometimes the children are coerced to agree to things that are not child-friendly to them. So those are the reasons why human rights are violated in my country.
Okay, thank you so much. Malama, kindly do not.
Okay, yeah, this is Gift Msonda from Zambia. I think the reason why human rights are being violated is because we women, we fail to come out whenever there is something. We shun away if even in taking part in political issues and other social issues. And also the other thing is that women's rights are being violated because of the tradition, the beliefs, and the customs that are around our country. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Malama. Esther, you are next. Your hand is up.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Esther. So I think one of the challenges that we face is cultural differences. So you find that in some communities, even when you're talking about such things, they would rather not the guys, the boys, be in that space, or the men be in that space, because they think it's just a ladies' problem. But I think it's up to all of us to take the responsibility and ensure that these things are not happening, and that both genders understand that this is something that's happening in the community. It can happen to your sister, to your mother, to anyone, and so we all have to take the responsibility, And then lastly, I think another problem that we have is that sometimes we go to the law enforcement. I think someone else shared, but I'll just share it. You go to law enforcement, you're sharing these problems, or this happened, but then they're conspiring with various people to ensure that, to kind of hide the people who are doing this particular practices. So
Okay.
I think that's a challenge. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Esther. We'll have Bayano and Anthony, and then we'll go to the chat to see some of the others so that they can also be included before we come back. So Bayano, please go ahead.
Excuse me. This is Bayano from Mozambique. Well, right now in northern Mozambique, there is a raging insurgency, and then where women have been kidnapped by the insurgents to be made as wives. And apart from that, because also people have to run away from their places of origin, most of them end up in ID camps in other places. And we have had situations where women have been hello. Yes, we've had situations where women have suffered like sexual molestation, so on and so forth. This from humanitarian workers. And then down here in Mozambique, in Maputo, where I am right now, since December, we've had over 3,000 cases of feminicides, women killed by their partners. Well, and most of the times you'll be told that it's because of cultural practices. Either the men felt that their masculinities had been challenged, so on and so forth. But I would think, like in the north right now, one of the major violations is the driver should be seen as the war, and then in those ID camps, the driver would be like, women do not have access to humanitarian aid, and then you'll find men taking advantage of that. So it becomes some sort of a transactional issue when I think aid workers should be the ones protecting these women, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Bayano. Anthony, before I come to you, I'd just like to comment on what Bayano has said, because when you think about the rights violations that are occurring when there is a conflict in northern Mozambique, then we are also talking about violations that have to do with everybody. Because if I'm escaping from my home because of conflict, it means that that's denying me my right to shelter. Children who are supposed to be going to school, whether they are boys, whether they are girls, they are denied a right to education. One of the rights is also a right to safety of person, of me as a person. And so when we are fleeing a conflict zone, because not all men go into the conflict zone, it means that we are losing that right to safety. We are moving into, as he says, an IDP camp where our shelter is definitely not the best, where we may not be having enough food, enough water, the sanitation may not be right. And then there are the other violations that occur that have been very, very well mentioned. And so I just felt that I needed to maybe stress a little bit more on this one. Okay, so the next person was Anthony.
Thank you very much. I'm Anthony Nkubira from Malawi. Just to add on what my colleagues have said about the violation of women, rights of women. Apart from traditional and religious beliefs that empowers a lot, or that invest a lot of powers in men and boys, there are also other reasons for violation of rights of women. Another issue is about the poverty, less education, and early marriages. If a woman is in this state, obviously it is an issue because there is less power for her to negotiate about her rights in the community or at the family level. Another issue is we haven't involved much of men in the fight against the virus, against gender-based violence. So men always see it as if women's rights is a women's issue. So there's no way we can help to fight gender-based violence, since some of them are perpetrators. So as a country or as a community, it's high time we involve male and the boys in the fight against gender-based violence. And another reason is
Anthony, maybe I'll cut you short. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let us thank you for those reasons. And sorry to cut you short, but it is because I'm also looking at our time, and I would like to maybe read some of the ones that are on the chat so that we can have those people also included. They talked about cultural norms. Somebody has said women have been made vulnerable to vocalize on what is right for them. Maditso has talked about power imbalance. Vanessa says ignorance. Mary Jones says male chauvinism, corruption. Human rights occur in my community due to patriarchy. Tabitha says because men are regarded as heads, women are not empowered. We're talking about because of economic difficulties in the family. Culture and religion has been mentioned. Policies are just on paper, cultural and religious beliefs. And then human rights violations. Annette says that human rights violations occurs because women are given freedom to participate in decision making. Annette Babiria, would you like to explain? Annette Babiria, are you?
Yes, I'm here. You know, sometimes, especially here in Uganda, sometimes women think that given the, once they are given opportunities in decision-making processes, they tend to be like they are very powerful. They don't listen to their spouses, and it causes a lot of violations in some areas because women are given into decision-making processes. Yeah,
So
especially in political participation. Hello?
So what would your solution be for that?
We need to maybe to empower women to have equal rights, equal say.
Okay, because I saw that there were some responses to your there were some question marks about your response, because when the way it is put is that women are not supposed to be in decision making. So maybe you want to, that is what you feel, women should not be in decision making?
No, they should.
Okay.
They should. They should, but men think that they are not like they are not supposed to.
Okay, that explains your answer a little bit better. Yes, because of the feeling that women should not perhaps be raising their voice, okay, or saying what they need to say. Then sometimes we see these imbalances where the same actions taken by a man and the same actions taken by a woman in the political sphere attract very, very different responses. And sometimes women are put down because then they are told you're behaving like a man, you're not doing the right thing, this is not cultural. And I want to point out that if I was sort of like grouping your answers together, and we can see that a lot of the human rights violations occur because of culture. And culture is normally tied in with ethnicity, with religion, with the beliefs and the value systems that we have. So if you go back to the values and values clarification, it was not a module, it was the beginning of your course. And you look at some of those values and the values that even we ourselves hold, we will see that sometimes we hold values and we hold beliefs that then can lead to human rights violations. A lot of the violations we have discussed have dealt with looking at violations at the level of family and of community. But also remember that we said that some of the human rights violations are, some of the human rights violations are at national and international level, where we talk about the systematic silencing of people. In some countries, human rights violations occur perhaps to journalists. They occur to people who are trying to gather news in order to make issues known to the world. They occur in leadership. They occur because of corruption. And so human rights are there and they affect both men and women. But what we need to recognize is that this effect, for example, I'll go back to the example that was given from Mozambique, the example of internal war. Internal conflict means that men, women, girls and boys are displaced from their homes. But what is normally monitored is, what is the lasting effect of this conflict, especially when the conflict ends? Who has had a disproportionate amount of rights violated? Whose human rights violations are going to feel the effects of these human rights violations far longer than the others? And unfortunately, we find that it is normally the females. And so human rights violations are not a women's thing. It is that in this course, you're going to be learning about what are these small differences that are. And that is why we need the international instruments in order to be able to protect those who are most vulnerable. If you go through the international instruments, you will find that a lot of them focus on women and focus on children, where you are focusing on the vulnerable, persons with disabilities, persons who are displaced. Why are we focusing on these people? Because without ensuring their human rights, then we are not going to meet the human rights for everybody. So I encourage you, thank you so much, first of all, for your participation in that discussion. Thank you so much for your participation in the chat. I encourage you go through module 2. It's quite fascinating to learn about these human rights in a little bit more details. Participate in the discussion, bring some of your thoughts to the discussion forum, to the WhatsApp forum. Let us keep on participating. If you know somebody who registered for this course and they're not participating, kindly remind them that they are missing a lot. So I want to finally end with my motivational slide as we finish up. And my motivational slide is from Maya Angelou, one of the greatest writers and thinkers of our times. And India Forbes got this quotation from her. It says, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And I hope that it applies to all of us who are taking this course. We may not fully understand issues that have to do with gender, but as we go through this course, you are knowing better, you are learning better, you are understanding better. And when you know better, do better. Have a lovely evening, have a lovely afternoon, have a lovely morning, wherever you are. We shall see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.